Today we're going to talk about sigma notation. Sigma is simply a way to add things together. So this is what it generally looks like. This giant E looking thing is a Greek letter called sigma, and it always implies addition, that we're adding things together. You also see down here the I. That's called the index of summation. That's simply what variable you're going to be plugging your numbers into. So whatever variable is down there, that's the variable you plug your numbers into. And then you have the number down below. That's called your lower bound. It's the first number you plug in. And then up top, you have your upper bound. That's the very last number that you should plug in. And then this out here represents the general term, or in this case the ith term, or it can be the nth term, or different things like that. So we're going to look at how to do this both in your calculator and by hand. So first let's look at one by hand. So we just have simply the equation I. So we take the bottom number, which in this case is 1, and we plug it into I. So we just get 1. And then you always just go up by 1 every time. We just use whole numbers. So then we plug in 2, then we plug in 3, then we plug in 4, then we plug in 5, then we plug in 6. Once you have plugged in this last number, you quit. So I simply add up 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6, and my answer is 21. So what that sigma notation is really saying is add up every integer from 1 to 6. Okay, we're going to look at several more now with doing it by hand. This might make it easier to see all these. So first of all, we're told to add 3 to whatever we plug in. So I plug it in for I and then add 3. So I plug in 0 and I get 3. Then I plug in 1. 1 plus 3 is 4. Then I plug in 2. 2 plus 3 is 5. Then I plug in 3. 3 plus 3 is 6. Then I plug in 4. 4 plus 3 is 7. Then I plug in 5, and 5 plus 3 is 8. Now, I want to make sure it's clear, I don't stop here just because I got a 5. I stop when I have plugged in 5. I just plugged in 2 to get that 5. 2 plus 3 gave me 5. So I go until I plug in this very top number. So 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 is going to give us 33. Okay, now this next example, it tells us to start with 2, and it tells us to square the number we put in. So we get 2 squared plus 3 squared plus 4 squared. And I know to be adding all these together because that's what sigma means. Sigma means you need to add them all together. 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16, so I believe that is 29. Alright, now let's try this next one. This is why the index of summation, this number or this letter right here, is important. It tells you where to plug it in. If you look here, we have an N and a K. Well, we need to know which one to plug in our numbers to. So since it's K equals 1, we plug our 1 in for K. So we'll get 1 over N times 1 squared plus 1. Then I do 2. 1 over N, 2 squared plus 1. 1 over N, 3 squared plus 1. And then 1 over N, 4 squared plus 1. And I stop at 4 because that's my number on top. So give me a second. I'm going to make myself some room here. Okay, so I still have 1 over N out front, but on the inside now, right here, 1 squared plus 1 is just 2. And then 1 over N times 5. 2 squared plus 1 is 5. And then 3 squared plus 1 is 10. And then 4 squared plus 1 is 17. So it looks like I still need more room. Sorry about that. Okay. So now I get 2 over N plus 5 over N plus 10 over N plus 17 over N gives us 34 over N. So it is possible for there to be a variable in your answer. Make sure you're plugging your numbers into the correct variable. In this case it was K. It's always identified by whatever is right here. Okay, last one. By hand anyway. Start with 1, and it says to plug it into J. So listen carefully. We have no J. That means we can't plug anything in. So when we use 1, we're just left with 5 in. When we use 2, we're just left with 5 in. When we use 3, we're just left with 5 in. And that's it. When we plugged in 1, it didn't change anything because there was no J. When we plugged in 2, it didn't change anything because there was no J. When we plugged in 3, we didn't change anything because there was no J. So when we add those together, we just get 15 in. So please pay attention to what letter is down here, because if it does not match what's here, then you don't actually plug it in. I know that may seem really silly, but if one day you ever do any computer programming, there actually is some reasons why you might do something like this. Now I want to make sure you know how to do it in the calculator. There's really no reason to have to do this when it's really large amounts of numbers. So if you have an 84, then it probably has something in here that looks a lot like a sigma. So let me do it that way first, and then I'll explain that equation up top. So if you, in your calculator, go to Math, then go down to 0, and you can just hit the number 0 if you want to, but I want you to see it at least one time. Here it says summation, so Math 0, summation. It gives you this, and then you just plug it in like you want. I always use x just because x is easy because it's right there. So I get x equals 3 on the bottom. I move up to the top, and I put a 50 in right there. And my equation is, I need parentheses, x squared plus 1, close the parentheses, over x. So if you notice, that matches. And if you would rather use in, since they use in, by all means, you can do that. You'll only be able to do these when those variables match. You couldn't do one like we did previously where it had a J and a N and they didn't match. They have to match. So you can use any letter you want as long as you use the same letter all the way throughout. To me, it's just easier to use X since that's a quick button. So now I hit enter, and the calculator does the work for me. So I get 1,274.999. We could probably just round that to 1275. Some of the older calculators with older operating systems don't have that sigma, but they do have a way to do it using this equation up top. You use the sum of the sequence and then equation, comma x, comma start, comma stop. So I do want to show you that just in case you're one of those people with an older calculator. So I'll show you that it gives you the exact same thing. To get to sum, you go to second list, which is right above stat. Then you go over to math, and the fifth one down is sum. To get to sequence, you go to second list. Again, it's right above stat. Go to the middle one, OPS. The fifth one down is sequence. A sequence is any... Oh, this is not what I expected. Okay, we'll just fill this in. The expression is the equation, so we just do parentheses x squared plus 1 over x. Sorry, this operating system is brand new and I've never seen this before, but I'm pretty sure this is how we do it. The variable would be x, the starting point is 3, and the stopping point is 50. And we'll go up by steps of 1, and we'll hit enter. Okay, so actually that did that for us, so that's great. In your calculator, it may simply read sequence, and then at that point, let me go ahead and hit enter, make sure this does what it needs to. Yes, you see it works the exact same way. On older calculators, you have to just do sum of the sequence, and then usually it just takes you to the normal screen, and at this point is when you'd have to plug in parentheses x squared plus 1 divided by x, comma x. This x right here is just telling the calculator what variable you're using. It's the same idea as what's right here. It's identifying what variable to plug the numbers into. And then you tell it the first number to plug in, 3, and the last number to plug in, 50. And if you do that, it will do the same thing even with an older version of the calculator.